The Grand Meridian glittered like a jewel dropped in the heart of the city. Crystal chandeliers rained light across marble floors. A string quartet stitched silver notes through the air. Cameras pulsed like patient lightning. Near the stage, a ring of donors, influencers, and power brokers leaned forward as the MC lifted a satin sash and a diamonded crown. Adrian Kane was already smiling for the headline he could practically taste. He cupped the waist of his fiancée, Giselle Moore, angling her toward the flashbulbs. "Our queen," he murmured, loud enough for 3 microphones to catch. Applause swelled. The crown descended. The room obeyed. Giselle performed triumph the way born performers breathe. Chin high, shoulders set, lashes lowered just enough to suggest humility. The sash read Queen of the City. The title mattered because perception mattered. And Adrian understood perception like most people understand oxygen. He raised her hand and kissed the knuckles, eyes scanning the room to confirm every rival saw him. "Record donations," he boasted to a hedge fund chair. "And wait until you hear who wants dinner with us next week." The chair congratulated him, then congratulated Giselle in that order. It pleased Adrian. Everything tonight, down to the orchid centerpieces, pleased Adrian. Reporters piled toward the stage, voices overlapping. "Giselle, who are you wearing?" "Adrian, how big was your pledge?" "What's next for the Queen of the City?" A publicist slid through the scrum, delivering practiced sound bites. "We don't do this for attention," Adrian said, adjusting his cufflinks so the watch winked at the nearest camera. "We do this because giving back is in our DNA." It could have been a line from last month. It could have been a line from last year. It didn't matter. Get photographed well. He pivoted shoulder to shoulder with the board chair, then angled again so the crown burned. Beyond the barricade of lenses, staff moved like tide, servers with silent steps, event coordinators with coiled earpieces. The ballroom doors, massive and mirrored, reflected champagne and sequins. A few guests drifted toward the terrace, where the city lay in dark velvet, windows glittering like distant bonfires. "After party at Caravel?" someone asked. "Only if we're seated in the glass room." Someone answered. A violinist tucked a stray curl behind her ear and slid into the next movement. The MC, savoring a final beat, lifted the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, one more round of applause for your queen." The doors at the far end opened. It wasn't loud, but silence spread anyway. First a pause, then a ripple, then a hush you could almost see. Heads turned the way flowers turn toward sun. 2 figures stood framed by the entrance, backlit by the corridor's softer light. The first was a woman in a fitted black gown with a clean architectural line, her hair swept into a low knot, her posture unflinching. One hand rested over the curve of her pregnant belly, steady and protective. The second was a man whose presence rearranged the room without raising a hand. Victor Lang. Someone whispered it first, breathless. Lang. The name moved faster than any camera. Conversations fell apart mid-sentence. A donor who'd never been starstruck in his life reached instinctively for his tie. Victor Lang rarely appeared anywhere that wasn't deliberate, and he never appeared for spectacle. He was the man behind men like Adrian, the capital behind the capital. The signature you never saw but always felt when skyscrapers rose. He offered his arm to the woman, and she took it, calm as a held note. Together they crossed the threshold. The doors sighed shut behind them. Adrian's smile broke, not cracked, broke. He recognized the woman instantly, though he hadn't seen her in months. Elena Torres Kane, his ex-wife. The person he had dismissed as too quiet for this world. As if quiet were a flaw you could fix with money. She had left with a suitcase and a silence that frightened him more than any shouting. He hadn't expected her to disappear so completely. He hadn't expected her to return at all. He definitely hadn't expected her to return like this, luminous and visibly pregnant, escorted by the hardest-to-reach man in the city. Giselle followed his gaze. "Who is that?" she hissed, smile still pinned in place for the press. Adrian didn't answer. His jaw worked, then set. The MC faltered a fraction, then recovered, tossing a harmless joke into the quiet. It died in the air. Cameras swiveled, recalibrating like hunting dogs catching a new scent. A photographer with a newswire patch whispered, "Get me the woman. Get me Lang. Get me them together." 3 shooters peeled off toward the entrance, weaving through donors with the ruthless grace of people who live for the photo everyone else will remember. Elena didn't rush. She didn't need to. The room adjusted to her pace the way a ship adjusts to a new current. She nodded once to the auctioneer, polite, detached, and once to the director of the foundation, who looked shocked and then suddenly, vividly grateful. The crown on Giselle's head glinted like a dare. Elena's hand rested on her belly like a vow. Victor's expression didn't change. It rarely did in public. What changed was the posture of the people nearest them, the subtle incline that belongs to the truly powerful or the truly dangerous. Adrian tried to laugh. It came out like a cough. "Security," he muttered to a staffer, but he didn't finish the sentence because there was nothing to finish. No one removes Victor Lang. No one escorts Elena anywhere without her consent. Not tonight. He adjusted his tuxedo as if the fit had betrayed him. "Why is she here?" Giselle asked, voice thinner. "This is my night." The publicist leaned in. "Smile. Stay with the step and repeat. We control the narrative." The publicist had never met a narrative like the one walking calmly down the center aisle. People began to stand, not in ovation exactly, but in that involuntary way crowds rise when an arrival matters. The foundation's largest donors had already read the confidential giving ledger. Some of them had already seen a name they'd never expected to see attached to a number that broke records. They didn't know if they were supposed to clap. They didn't know if they were allowed to breathe. Elena reached the clearing in front of the stage and stopped, perfectly positioned between the crown and the microphones. The quartet, not knowing what else to do, kept playing. Adrian hopped off the riser, cutting across cable lines toward her. "What are you doing?" he said, choosing a smile he'd used on investors he was about to undercut. Up close, Elena looked different. Not harder, exactly, truer. "Enjoying the gala," she said. Her voice had the evenness of someone who'd practiced not for performance, but for peace. She glanced at his bow tie, then at the crown. "Congratulations." He stared at her hand on her belly and felt something complicated and hot behind his ribs. It wasn't love, it wasn't remorse. It was recognition. Victor stepped a half-pace forward, which felt like a door closing softly. "Adrian," he said. It wasn't a greeting. It was a statement of fact in the tone of a ledger. Adrian's throat tightened. He had tried, more than once, to get coffee with this man, and been told, kindly, that calendars were unkind. He had never been in shouting distance of Lang without a mediator. Now Lang was here, with Elena, saying his name in a room where every ear was tuned to power. "Mr. Lang," Adrian said, discovering that his mouth had gone dry. On stage, the MC cleared his throat. "Friends," he tried. "Friends, tonight we celebrate generosity." He fumbled a card, found another. "We also celebrate surprises." Nervous laughter skittered, then stopped when the foundation director approached the mic. Cheeks flushed with the kind of gratitude people usually reserve for miracles. "Before we continue," she said carefully, "we would like to acknowledge a gift that changed this evening, and frankly, our year." She looked toward Elena as if seeking permission. Elena didn't move. Victor didn't blink. "We will share details shortly," the director finished. "For now, thank you." Giselle's crown felt suddenly heavy. The pins bit her scalp. She looked at Adrian like he owed her a new reality. "Tell me," she whispered through her smile, "that this is a coincidence." Adrian stared at Elena's dress, the seam that skimmed the fabric that caught light without begging for it, and found himself hating the way the room tilted toward her as if she were magnetic north. "It's fine," he said, because fine was a word he could say without meaning. "This is noise." But the noise was focus, and the focus had shifted, and everyone with a camera knew it. A reporter reached Elena first. "Miss Kane, are you here to support the Queen of the City?" The use of her married name snapped a small tether in Adrian's chest. Elena lifted her eyes to the reporter, then past her, to the donors whose checks had bought weeks of hospital beds and months of after-school programs. "I'm here to support the city," she said, "and the children who live in it." She didn't look at the crown. She didn't need to. The crown looked at her. Somewhere in the back, someone finally started clapping. It spread, hesitant, then sure. Victor offered Elena his hand again, and she took it. Together they turned slightly toward the foundation director, toward the stage, toward whatever the night was about to become. Adrian stood rooted, smiling for cameras that weren't pointed at him anymore. The quartet drifted into a brighter key. In the glass doors, the city's lights shifted, like a living thing. Giselle steadied her crown, lifted her shoulders, and tried to summon more wattage than the woman who had just walked in without trying. "Stay calm," the publicist hissed. Calm was a country Giselle had never visited. The director gestured, and the aisle opened as if by design. Elena's steps were measured, unafraid. She didn't look back. She didn't hurry. She didn't apologize for arriving late to a story that used to belong to someone else. At the foot of the stage, she paused, one palm curved over the life inside her, the other at her side, empty and free. Victor faced forward, impassive, a mountain wearing a tuxedo, 100 small lenses inhaled together. The MC smiled like a man stepping into weather he hadn't predicted. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "a development." And just like that, the night everyone thought belonged to Adrian Kane bent around a different center of gravity. The crown still glittered, the music still sang, the money still mattered. But the room itself, its breath, its hunger, its direction, had changed. Photographers clung to the edges of the moment so they could sell it to the morning. The hedge fund chair checked his phone and texted his wife 3 words: "She's with Lang." Adrian adjusted his cufflinks again and found his hands unsteady. Elena lifted her chin a fraction, as if feeling a private wind. The story had arrived. Her name was Amelia Hart, and to the outside world, she was invisible. At 29, she was the kind of woman people underestimated without even thinking about it. Soft brown eyes, a gentle smile, and a quiet presence that rarely commanded the room. That was exactly how she had survived the past 3 years of her marriage to Daniel Cross, the man who would later brag to anyone who'd listen about his glamorous new fiancée. When Amelia first met Daniel, she was fresh out of college, balancing 2 part-time jobs while finishing her graduate degree in community health. She was working the night shift as a receptionist at a boutique hotel where Daniel had checked in one rainy Tuesday wearing a tailored navy suit and the confidence of someone used to getting what he wanted. He had noticed her instantly, or at least that's what she had thought back then. He flirted in a way that felt intoxicating, promised a life she had only seen in magazines, and within a year, they were married. For a while, she believed she had found her safe harbor. Daniel's business in high-end event management kept him busy, but he was charming in public and attentive enough in private to make her feel like she mattered. The truth was, Daniel didn't marry Amelia for love. He married her because she was steady, loyal, and easy to mold into the perfect accessory for his rising career. She didn't complain when he traveled for weeks, didn't question the way his phone seemed permanently glued to his hand. She learned to smooth over his temper in front of clients and to keep the house spotless for unexpected visits from investors. Amelia became, in Daniel's words, a partner who knew her place. Then came the pregnancy. The night she told him, she had planned every detail. His favorite dinner, a small wrapped box containing the ultrasound picture, and a note that read, "We're going to be 3. She had imagined tears of joy, maybe even the rare embrace that wasn't just for show. Instead, Daniel had stared at the image for a long, silent moment before muttering, "Well, that's going to make things complicated." From that day on, Amelia noticed the shift. He became more distant, more irritable. Calls came later at night, trips lasted longer, and then came the rumors, whispers from acquaintances, an overheard conversation at one of his events, and finally, the unmistakable sight of a text message lighting up his phone from someone named Elena, ending with a heart emoji. Amelia didn't confront him, not right away. She told herself she needed proof, that she couldn't risk an argument that might push him further away when she was already feeling so alone. Her days became an endless loop of prenatal appointments, grocery lists, and quiet evenings in a house that felt too big, too cold. She would fall asleep to the faint hum of the fridge and wake to an empty bed, wondering which lie he had told her before slipping out. The only warmth in her life came from the tiny life growing inside her. Each kick was a reminder that she was still needed, still capable of creating something pure in a world that had become so painfully artificial. She would place her hand on her belly and whisper promises about safety, about love, about never letting this child feel the kind of abandonment she felt every time Daniel chose someone else over her. Her own background made those promises sacred. Amelia had grown up in foster care, passed from home to home until she was 16. She knew what it was to feel disposable, to be tolerated rather than loved. She had vowed long ago that when she had a family, it would be different. That vow was the anchor keeping her steady while her marriage slowly rotted beneath the glossy surface. By the time Daniel's affair was an open secret, Amelia was in her third trimester. The fatigue was heavy, but so was the quiet resolve building inside her. She began to notice things she had ignored before. The way he checked his reflection more often when his phone buzzed, the way he slipped out during family gatherings with the excuse of taking a call, the way he laughed more easily with strangers than with her. And when she finally saw a tabloid photo of him and Elena at a charity gala, his hand low on her back, both of them smiling like a couple who had nothing to hide, Amelia realized she wasn't invisible anymore. She was irrelevant. But irrelevance has a strange way of becoming fuel. She began making quiet preparations. She set up a separate bank account, moved her important documents to a safety deposit box, and reached out to an old friend from her grad school days, someone who happened to have deep connections in the philanthropic circles Daniel worshipped. That friend would later become the man who stood beside her when she made her entrance at the gala. But for now, he was just a name in her phone, a possibility she wasn't yet ready to reveal. On the surface, Amelia played her part flawlessly. She attended Daniel's events with polite smiles, nodded at the right moments, and never once hinted at the betrayal she carried like a stone in her chest. Inside, though, she was cataloging every slight, every insult, every night he didn't come home. She was storing it all away for the moment she knew would come, the moment he would push her entirely out of his life to make room for Elena. That moment came sooner than she expected. It was a Tuesday morning when Daniel casually mentioned that he had been asked to attend the Crown and Charity Gala, the city's most exclusive event. "They're only inviting top-tier contributors this year," he said, pouring coffee like they were talking about the weather. "Naturally, I'm bringing Elena." The words hit her like a physical blow. "Elena?" she repeated, her voice steady despite the sudden rush of heat in her cheeks. He didn't look up. "She's better suited for this kind of event, you understand." And just like that, the man she had once thought would protect her had erased her from his biggest night, replacing her with the woman who had been chipping away at their marriage for months. Amelia didn't argue. She didn't cry. She simply nodded, letting him think he had won. But inside, something clicked into place, a quiet, steel-edged certainty that she wasn't just going to be erased. She was going to walk back into his perfect evening and burn the memory of her into every mind in that room. And when she did, she wouldn't be alone. The Crown and Charity Gala was more than just a social event. It was the single night of the year when the city's elite came together to flaunt their wealth under the guise of generosity. Tickets cost more than some people's annual salaries, and that was before you factored in the silent auction items, private islands for a week, vintage wines from royal cellars, dinners with celebrities flown in just for the occasion. To be invited was to be relevant, to attend was to be seen, and to be crowned Queen of the City was to own the narrative for months afterward. Held at the historic Langford Grand Hotel, the ballroom was a cathedral of opulence. Marble floors reflected light from the hand-cut crystal chandeliers that hung like frozen fireworks. Towering floral arrangements spilled over with rare orchids and roses bred in temperature-controlled greenhouses halfway across the world. Each table was dressed in midnight blue silk linens with place cards scripted in gold ink. Even the champagne flutes bore the gala's crest, a gold crown etched into crystal. For the right people, even the glassware was a signal of power. Behind the glamour, there was a rhythm to the night that insiders understood. The early hour belonged to the red carpet, flashbulbs popping as women in couture gowns stepped out of town cars, diamonds catching the camera's hunger. The mid-evening belonged to the auction, where fortunes changed hands with the lift of a discreet paddle. And the late hour? That belonged to the crowning of the Queen of the City, a tradition born decades ago as a way to honor the woman who raised the most money for the gala's chosen charity. It was equal parts competition, performance, and political maneuvering. This year, the stakes were higher than ever. The gala's beneficiary was the Children's Promise Foundation, a cause close enough to the heart to disarm cynics, but broad enough to draw massive donations. The rumor said that the title was already in the bag for Elena Cross, the same Elena Daniel had replaced Amelia with. Elena had charmed the judges, the press, and, most importantly, the board of donors. The fact that Daniel had all but installed himself as her campaign manager only added fuel to the story. Daniel arrived early that night with Elena on his arm, radiating the smug energy of a man certain he was about to be photographed into history. He wore a black tuxedo tailored to perfection, the kind that whispered wealth without having to shout it. Elena wore a champagne-colored gown, dripping in sequins, each step sending ripples of light across the polished floor. Her crown-to-be had not yet touched her head, but in her mind, and in Daniel's, she was already wearing it. Every move Daniel made that night was calculated. He steered Elena toward the most powerful clusters of people, making introductions like a king presenting his queen. "You'll be seeing her on stage soon," he told a hedge fund executive, his tone dripping with certainty. Cameras followed them, eating up the narrative, the dazzling newcomer, the ambitious partner, the unbeatable campaign. Somewhere in the room, a reporter was already drafting tomorrow's headline. What Daniel didn't know was that the guest list contained a name he had deliberately left out: Amelia Hart. Her plan had been in motion for weeks. The moment Daniel told her she wasn't suited for the gala, Amelia had reached out to Victor Lang, a man whose influence at this event was unmatched. Victor was the kind of power you didn't see on stage. He was the one deciding who got to be there in the first place. His foundation was the gala's largest donor, and what he supported, the board supported. Amelia had met him years earlier through her nonprofit work, and though they had never been close, he remembered her sincerity and the depth of her commitment to children's causes. She didn't ask for a favor, she presented him with an opportunity. Her proposal was simple: a substantial donation from her own startup's charitable arm, directed entirely toward the Children's Promise Foundation, in partnership with the Lang Foundation. The amount was enough to shift the night's record-breaking tally. It also came with one condition: she would attend the gala as Victor's guest. Victor didn't hesitate. "I like a good story," he said over the phone, his voice carrying the kind of calm authority that could both unsettle and reassure. "And I think this one will be memorable." So while Daniel paraded Elena in front of cameras, Amelia was preparing for her own entrance. In a suite upstairs, a stylist adjusted the train of her midnight black gown, a piece custom-made for her by a designer she had once illustrated children's books with, back when her life was simpler. Her hair was swept into a low chignon, and the only jewelry she wore was a pair of sapphire drop earrings, Victor's quiet suggestion. The deep blue caught the light like secrets catching air. The timing of her arrival was deliberate. Too early, and she would be just another guest drifting in with the crowd. Too late, and the focus would be locked on Elena's crowning. She and Victor waited until the silent auction was winding down, when the chatter was loudest and the cameras were searching for their next target. Then, just as the MC was preparing to announce the top donors of the evening, the grand ballroom doors opened. No one noticed at first, and then someone did. The sight of Victor Lang, rarely seen in public, walking in with a pregnant woman on his arm, was enough to pull eyes from every corner. Conversations faltered. Photographers pivoted like soldiers following a new command. And as the pair moved forward, the energy in the room shifted. The floral scent, the hum of conversation, the faint notes of the string quartet, all of it seemed to dim against the sudden spotlight that followed them. From his place near the stage, Daniel froze. For a second, his mind refused to process what he was seeing. Amelia? Here. Not in the plain clothes of the wife he had left behind, but in a gown that belonged on a magazine cover, carrying herself with the kind of calm that only came from knowing you had the upper hand. His hand tightened on Elena's waist, but his smile slipped just enough for the cameras to catch it. Victor's presence was the final twist of the knife. Daniel had tried for years to get in front of the man, to pitch ideas or partnerships, and had been politely ignored every time. And now, here was Victor, escorting Daniel's ex-wife into the most important night of his year. As Amelia and Victor reached the front of the room, the MC's voice cracked slightly before recovering. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "it's my honor to introduce one of tonight's most generous contributors, Mr. Victor Lang, and his guest, Ms. Amelia Hart." The applause was immediate, but it wasn't just polite. It was curious, charged, alive. People wanted to know who she was, why she was here, and what story had just unfolded right under Daniel's nose. And Amelia, with the faintest smile, was ready to let them wonder. Daniel Cross had built his career on charm, timing, and a dangerous talent for making people believe he was indispensable. He could glide through a crowded room and convince 3 different investors they each had his full attention. He was quick with a smile, quicker with a flattering word, and never lingered long enough for anyone to notice he'd given them nothing of substance. To the outside world, he was magnetic. To Amelia, he had become a storm in an expensive suit. When they first married, his ambition had been exciting. She admired how he could envision opportunities where others saw obstacles. But over time, that ambition swelled into something heavier: entitlement. It wasn't enough for Daniel to succeed. He needed to be seen succeeding, to be applauded for every victory, no matter how small. And when Amelia's pregnancy made her less available to play the part of the polished partner, he began looking elsewhere for that applause. The affair with Elena wasn't an accident. It was a calculated move. Elena was photogenic, bold, and willing to be whatever Daniel needed in public. She laughed at his jokes without hesitation, leaned in during conversations for the perfect candid shot, and wore dresses that made photographers fight for angles. She fit neatly into the image Daniel had been crafting for himself. The rising star in the city's high society, partnered with a woman who turned heads. The first time Amelia suspected something, it was subtle. Daniel came home from a networking dinner, smelling faintly of a perfume she didn't own. He brushed it off, saying a colleague had given Elena a congratulatory hug for securing a sponsorship deal. But the explanations grew thinner, the lies more transparent. Once, she found a hotel keycard in the pocket of his tuxedo pants, one he claimed belonged to a client too drunk to remember his own room number. By then, Amelia had stopped asking. She didn't need the truth from his mouth. She could read it in the way he avoided her eyes. Daniel's arrogance peaked the day he told her she wouldn't be attending the Crown and Charity Gala. He delivered the news casually, almost dismissively, as if it were a foregone conclusion. "Elena's better suited for this kind of event," he said over his coffee. "You understand." He didn't even look at her, just scrolled through his phone, no doubt checking the RSVP list he'd curated like a personal trophy case. The insult was surgical, swift, precise, and designed to leave no visible wound. But Amelia felt the cut deep. He told himself she wouldn't make a scene. In his mind, Amelia was predictable. She would swallow the humiliation, retreat into her quiet routines, and let him move forward unchallenged. That was part of why he'd married her in the first place. She wasn't a threat. She didn't have the claws for his world. Or so he thought. In the weeks leading up to the gala, Daniel and Elena became inseparable fixtures in the city's event pages. They were photographed at fundraisers, business openings, and private dinners, always in some artfully intimate pose. Daniel talked openly about her chances of winning the crown, framing it as a victory for them both. "We've worked so hard for this," he told a local magazine, his arm draped around Elena's waist. "It's about raising money for a great cause. But of course, recognition never hurts." Behind that polished smile, Daniel believed he had engineered the perfect future. Amelia was out of the picture, and Elena was about to be crowned in front of the city's most influential audience. He would be on stage beside her, soaking in the applause, shaking hands with donors, and securing partnerships for his next big venture. The crown wasn't just a symbol for Elena, it was a spotlight for him. What he didn't account for was Amelia's silence being anything but surrender. In his arrogance, Daniel had underestimated her network. He had no idea she'd kept in touch with Victor Lang. He didn't know she had built a charitable initiative through her own work, one with enough financial weight to impress even the most jaded philanthropists. He certainly didn't imagine she would choose the night of his triumph to appear, pregnant, radiant, and escorted by the one man in the room whose approval could eclipse his. At the gala, Daniel's confidence radiated like heat. He moved through the crowd with Elena, introducing her to board members and old money families, as if he were presenting royalty. "You'll be seeing her on stage soon," he told them, his grin a masterclass in self-assurance. He didn't notice the subtle shift in the air until the applause for a different entrance started to ripple through the room. When the ballroom doors opened to reveal Victor and Amelia, Daniel's first reaction wasn't shock. It was irritation. Who had invited her? And why was she with him? His jaw tightened as cameras abandoned his side of the room for hers. Elena, sensing the change, whispered, "What's going on?" But he ignored her. He couldn't take his eyes off the way Amelia carried herself. Calm, deliberate, untouchable. For the first time in years, Daniel felt something unfamiliar in her presence. Intimidation. She wasn't here to beg, cry, or cause a scene. She was here to be seen. And she was succeeding. Still, his arrogance wouldn't let him accept what was happening. He convinced himself it was a coincidence, a fluke. Maybe Victor had simply invited her as a courtesy. Maybe no one in the room knew who she was. Maybe this wouldn't matter by the time the crown was placed on Elena's head. But when the MC announced Amelia as one of the night's most generous contributors, standing alongside Victor Lang, those maybes turned to ash. Daniel clapped mechanically, forcing his expression into something polite. Inside, his thoughts spun like a centrifuge. He needed to regain control of the narrative. He needed to pull Elena back into focus. He needed the cameras to return to him. But the more he tried to reclaim the spotlight, the clearer it became that it was gone. The guests who had been circling him moments earlier were now angling for introductions to Amelia. The board members he'd been courting were leaning toward Victor, their smiles genuine in a way they'd never been for him. And in every photo, there she was, glowing, centered, undeniable. Daniel's arrogance had blinded him to the possibility that Amelia could ever stand on equal ground with him. Now she was standing taller. What stung most wasn't the loss of attention. It was the realization that he had done this to himself. By underestimating her, by pushing her out, by thinking she was better suited to stay home, he had given her the perfect stage for her return. And she had taken it without a single word of warning. As the night moved toward the crowning, Daniel tried to focus on the plan he'd built for months, but the cracks were there, widening with every glance in Amelia's direction. He smiled for the cameras, but behind the mask, the truth was setting in. The man who prided himself on controlling every outcome had just lost the one that mattered most. The ballroom was designed for spectacle, but it wasn't supposed to belong to her. From the moment Amelia stepped inside on Victor Lang's arm, the oxygen in the room seemed to shift. The applause that greeted them wasn't the polite, obligatory kind Daniel had orchestrated for Elena. It was genuine, curious, and tinged with awe. People rose slightly from their chairs, leaning to get a better look. Photographers swarmed as if someone had just whispered the words, "front page." Victor's presence was the detonator. He didn't attend public events lightly, and when he did, it was because something, or someone, mattered. Guests who had been ignoring the donor list suddenly recalled the largest contribution of the evening. A staggering sum attributed jointly to the Lang Foundation and Amelia Hart. No one had seen her in months, and now she was here, visibly pregnant, in a gown that made her look like she'd stepped out of a fashion editorial, walking beside the most influential man in the room. Daniel felt the eyes pivot. Moments ago, he'd been holding court near the stage, Elena at his side, both of them basking in the glow of near-certain victory. Now that light was gone, swallowed by the gravitational pull of a woman he had dismissed as irrelevant. Elena's nails dug into his arm through the sequined fabric of her gown. "Why is she here?" she whispered, her smile frozen for the benefit of the cameras that still lingered. Daniel forced a shrug, his jaw tightening. "She's not important," he said, but the lie tasted like metal. The MC, sensing the room's new focus, cleared his throat into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "please join me in welcoming Mr. Victor Lang and his guest, Ms. Amelia Hart, two of our most generous benefactors this evening." The applause swelled, flashing bulbs popping in rapid succession. Daniel clapped too, the sound mechanical, each strike of his palms echoing the fact that his carefully planned narrative was unraveling. Amelia didn't hurry. Each step toward the front of the room was deliberate, her posture regal, her chin slightly lifted. She glanced around as though taking in the decor, the guests, the night itself, never once acknowledging Daniel directly. It was the kind of composure that made people wonder if she knew something they didn't, and she did. When she and Victor reached the edge of the stage, the foundation director hurried over, clasping her hands warmly. "Miss Hart, we're so honored," she gushed, the sincerity in her voice amplified by the microphone she'd forgotten she was still holding. "Your contribution will change so many lives." Amelia's reply was simple, her voice carrying without effort. "That's why we're here. It's about the children, not the crown." Her words seemed casual, but Daniel heard the sting buried in them. The cameras heard it too. The audience laughed softly, not at her, but with her. It was the kind of moment money couldn't buy. Authentic, disarming, unforgettable. And in that instant, the hierarchy shifted. Elena was no longer the centerpiece. She was the accessory to a man whose former wife had just stolen the spotlight without even trying. Daniel tried to reassert control. He led Elena toward a group of influential donors, hoping to redirect attention. But even as they shook hands and exchanged pleasantries, he could feel it, their eyes flicking over his shoulder, tracking Amelia's movements. Conversations cut short as people excused themselves to say hello to Victor. The same donors Daniel had been courting for weeks were now beelining toward his ex-wife. When the MC returned to the microphone to announce the evening's top donors, the room braced for the expected. In years past, the honor had gone to established names, legacy families. This time, there was a twist. In third place, he announced, the Crown and Charity Committee thanks Mr. and Mrs. David Renner. Polite applause. In second place, Daniel Cross and Miss Alina Rowe. The applause was louder than polite, but softer than expected. Daniel's smile froze. And in first place, the MC continued, setting a new record for a single donation in gala history, the Lang Foundation, in partnership with Miss Dayton. The ballroom erupted. Cameras flashed like a storm. People rose to their feet. Even those who didn't know Amelia felt compelled to applaud. This was the kind of gesture that defined the night. She and Victor stepped forward, and the MC offered them the microphone. Daniel felt the humiliation burn like acid in his chest. Elena's grip on his arm slackened. Amelia spoke briefly, thanking the foundation and the guests for their generosity. She didn't mention Daniel, didn't acknowledge Elena, didn't so much as glance their way. But every person in that room knew exactly what was happening. This was a reclamation, not of a relationship, but of dignity, of power, of narrative. When she handed the microphone back, Victor leaned toward the MC and said something quietly. The MC nodded, smiling, then turned back to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "it's my understanding that Miss Hart's contribution this evening was inspired by a commitment to community that predates this gala. She's been working for years to expand educational resources for underprivileged children, and tonight her vision will be fully funded." It wasn't just a win. It was a legacy. The applause went on long enough that Daniel stopped clapping before it ended. Every cheer felt like a nail sealing the coffin on the image he had built for himself and Elena. He had wanted the night to be about their triumph. Instead, it was about Amelia's return. The final blow came during the crowning ceremony. As the MC prepared to announce the Queen of the City, the audience was still buzzing from Amelia's appearance. Elena's name was called, as expected, and she walked to the stage with a practiced smile. Daniel followed, positioning himself for the photographers, but the applause that greeted her was thinner than the roar Amelia had received minutes earlier. The crown glittered, but it felt like costume jewelry, compared to the weight of what Amelia had already claimed. When the photo call began, Daniel noticed the cruel efficiency of the press. They took the required shots of Elena in her crown, then pivoted to capture Amelia and Victor in conversation with the city's most influential figures. By the time dessert was served, it was clear which images would dominate the next morning's coverage. Elena tried to mask her frustration, but Daniel could feel it radiating off her. "I thought you said she wouldn't be here," she muttered. He didn't respond. There was nothing to say. From across the room, Amelia met his eyes for the first time all night. There was no gloating in her expression, no malice, just a calm, unshakable certainty. It was the look of someone who knew she'd already won the only battle worth fighting. And in that moment, Daniel understood the true humiliation. Not that she had stolen his spotlight, but that she had never needed it in the first place. Before Amelia Hart walked into the Crown and Charity Gala with the poise of someone who belonged there, she had fallen so far, she wondered if she'd ever stand again. The morning Daniel told her she wouldn't be attending, she held herself together just long enough for him to leave the house. She smiled faintly, nodded, even kissed his cheek. The door shut behind him with a click that felt like a lock on a prison cell. As soon as the sound faded, her body sagged against the kitchen counter. Her knees buckled. She slid down to the tile floor, still clutching the coffee mug she hadn't touched. For a long time she didn't cry, just sat there, staring at the grain of the wood cabinets. The baby moved, a gentle flutter, and she pressed a trembling hand to her belly. "It's okay," she whispered, though she didn't believe it. "We're okay." She wasn't, not even close. That afternoon, she walked through the house like a ghost, every room whispering reminders of what had changed. The dining room, where they'd once shared long dinners, now looked like a showroom for strangers. The master bedroom felt colder than the street outside. She paused at the vanity, catching sight of herself in the mirror. Her hair was unkempt, her skin pale. There was a softness in her eyes she didn't recognize, a kind of exhaustion that went deeper than sleep. The first tears came then, hot and unstoppable. She thought of the woman Daniel had chosen instead, Elena, always immaculate, always camera-ready. Amelia imagined her at fittings for designer gowns, laughing in Daniel's ear while he adjusted his cufflinks. The comparison was a blade she kept twisting on herself. Days blurred. Meals went untouched. Phone calls from friends went unanswered. Her prenatal vitamins sat in a row on the counter like quiet witnesses to her unraveling. She told herself she was just tired, that it was normal to feel off during pregnancy, but deep down she knew this was something heavier. It was grief, not for the man she had lost, but for the life she had been building, the security she thought she'd found. One night she woke in the small hours, the house silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. She padded to the living room and sat on the couch, pulling one of Daniel's discarded sweaters around her shoulders. It still smelled faintly of his cologne. She closed her eyes, and for a fleeting second she wished she could go back, before the lies, before the distance, before she knew what he was capable of. But the moment passed, and when it did, something else took its place, the smallest flicker of anger. It started as a whisper. "He doesn't get to do this to me." She turned the thought over like a coin, testing its weight. It wasn't just about pride. It was about survival. She couldn't disappear, not for her own sake, and not for the child who would soon depend on her completely. The shift didn't happen overnight. At first, it was small steps. She forced herself to eat breakfast. She showered, dried her hair, and put on clean clothes, even if no one would see her. She answered a call from her old grad school friend James, who had once told her, "The only thing you can't come back from is giving up." James listened without judgment. When she finally told him about the gala, about Elena, about Daniel's dismissal of her, there was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, "You don't need his permission to be in that room." She laughed bitterly. "It's invitation only." "Then get invited," he said simply. That was the first time Victor Lang's name came up. James had done consulting work for the Lang Foundation, and knew Victor respected people who acted with purpose, not pretense. "You've done real work for children's programs, Amelia," James reminded her. "That's his cause. If you make a proposal, he'll listen." It took her 3 days to write the email, 3 days of drafting and deleting, trying to find the balance between professionalism and urgency. She outlined her nonprofit initiative, explained its alignment with the Foundation's mission, and detailed how a combined donation could transform the Children's Promise project. She didn't mention Daniel or Elena, not once. This wasn't about them. This was about her reclaiming herself. Victor's reply came within hours. "Let's talk." They met at a quiet corner table in a downtown cafe. He was everything his reputation promised, measured, precise, but with a sharp intelligence that made you feel seen. He asked questions about her work, her plans, her child. She answered honestly, her voice steady for the first time in weeks. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair. I like a good story, he said. And you've got one. But this isn't just about a moment in the spotlight, is it? No, she said, meeting his gaze. It's about building something that lasts. He nodded once. Good. Then we'll make sure you're in that room. Leaving the cafe, Amelia felt something she hadn't in months. Momentum. The depression hadn't vanished. It still lingered at the edges, but it no longer defined her. She had a plan. She had an ally. And for the first time, she was thinking beyond Daniel's shadow. In the weeks that followed, she prepared quietly. She met with her stylist friend to design a gown that was elegant without begging for attention. She reviewed her speech in case she was asked to speak. She arranged for the sizable donation to be processed in time for the gala, ensuring it would place her name and Victor's at the top of the donor list. Every step was intentional, calculated not for revenge, but for self-respect. Still, there were moments when the old sadness tried to pull her back. A song on the radio that reminded her of their early days. A doctor's appointment where she sat alone in the waiting room, surrounded by couples. A dream in which Daniel apologized, and she woke with tears on her face. But each time she reminded herself, the woman in that dream didn't exist anymore. She was becoming someone else. The night before the gala, she stood in front of her mirror, the gown hanging nearby, the sapphire earrings on the dresser. She placed her hands over her belly and spoke aloud to her child. We're walking in there tomorrow, and we're not hiding. Not ever again. For the first time since Daniel had shut her out, she believed it. The next evening, when she stepped out of the car onto the Langford Grand's red carpet, cameras flashing, Victor at her side, she felt the weight of the journey she'd taken. The collapse had been real. Painful, messy, nearly impossible to climb out of. But it had also been the foundation for something stronger. And as the ballroom doors opened, she realized she wasn't just walking into the gala. She was walking back into herself. The gala had reached that golden hour when the champagne was at its finest chill, the musicians had found their rhythm, and the city's elite were leaning into their conversations with the ease of people who believed they were untouchable. Daniel, however, was anything but at ease. He'd been glancing toward Amelia all night, trying to read her purpose. The fact that she hadn't so much as acknowledged him gnawed at him more than a public confrontation would have. But Amelia wasn't there for confrontation. She was there for revelation. While Elena made her rounds, trying to reclaim scraps of the attention that had slipped through her fingers, Amelia stood with Victor near the silent auction display. Guests approached in small waves, donors, board members, even 2 city officials, each eager to thank her for her contribution. She listened, smiled, and engaged with genuine warmth, but behind her calm exterior, she was watching the room like a chessboard. The opportunity came when the foundation director tapped a crystal glass for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "before we continue with tonight's final pledges, Mr. Lang has requested a few minutes to share an exciting announcement." A ripple of curiosity swept through the crowd. Victor Lang rarely spoke publicly, and when he did, it was for something significant. He stepped to the microphone, his deep voice cutting through the ambient chatter. "Tonight is about generosity," he began. "About using influence and resources to make a real difference. I've been fortunate to partner with many individuals who share that vision. This year, one of those individuals has not only contributed financially, but has committed to a 5-year plan to expand the reach of the Children's Promise Foundation far beyond this city's borders." He paused, letting the words sink in. Cameras angled forward. "That partner," Victor continued, "is standing right here, Miss Amelia Hart." Applause thundered. Amelia stepped forward, her expression composed, though her heart pounded in her chest. She took the microphone from Victor, feeling the eyes of the entire room, and Daniel's most of all, on her. "I wasn't sure I'd be here tonight," she began, "not because I didn't care about the cause, but because life has a way of making you feel small when you've been told you don't belong somewhere. But the truth is, belonging isn't given. You claim it." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the audience. "My work with children's programs has shown me that the real change happens when you think bigger. So with Victor's partnership, we'll be launching the Hart Lang Initiative, a program that will fund education, healthcare, and mentorship opportunities for underprivileged children in 5 cities across the country. The applause grew louder, but Amelia wasn't finished. "This isn't about a crown," she said, her eyes sweeping the crowd. "It's about making sure that when these children grow up, they know they are valued, seen, and capable of changing their own worlds." It was subtle, but Daniel felt the hit. She'd used his language, valued, seen, but not for him, not for the image he'd built. She'd taken it and made it something real. As the applause swelled again, Amelia handed the microphone back to Victor. But before stepping away, she added, "And for those wondering, yes, I'll be in this city for a while. My family will be here." That was the moment Daniel's stomach dropped. My family. Not my child. My family. It was intentional, and it was aimed straight at him. A few heads turned toward her rounded belly, then toward Victor. Whispers began to weave through the crowd. Victor, unbothered by the speculation, concluded the announcement and invited everyone to join in the final round of bidding. But the air in the room had changed. Amelia's words had planted questions. Questions no one would ask her directly tonight, but that would be discussed in penthouses and boardrooms by morning. Daniel moved toward her, his steps quick but controlled. "What are you doing?" he hissed when he reached her, forcing a tight smile for the benefit of a nearby photographer. "Supporting a cause," she said evenly, taking a sip of champagne. "Same as you." "You know what I mean," he pressed, lowering his voice. "You're making people think." "What they think isn't my concern," she interrupted. "I told the truth. I'll be here, with my family." Her calmness infuriated him. He wanted her rattled, defensive, apologizing. Instead, she was composed, radiant, and untouchable. "You can't just—" he started, but she was already turning to greet another guest. Across the room, Elena was watching, her jaw tight. She didn't need the full context to understand that the night's perfect narrative had been cracked down the middle. Every smile she gave now felt forced, every congratulation hollow. The crown on her head felt lighter than the weight in her stomach. Back near the stage, Victor leaned toward Amelia. "You handled that well," he said quietly. "I wasn't trying to handle anything," she replied. "I just told the truth." "Truth," Victor said with a faint smile, "is the most effective strategy, especially when people expect you to stay silent." As the gala wound toward its close, the whispers only grew. Some speculated that Victor was the father of Amelia's child. Others guessed that she had been brought in as a deliberate counterweight to Daniel and Elena's rise. No one knew the exact story, and that was precisely how Amelia wanted it. The mystery made her presence even more potent. Daniel, meanwhile, was left playing defense in a game he thought he'd already won. Every handshake came with a question disguised as a compliment. Every smile felt like it was masking curiosity about Amelia, not interest in Elena. He could feel his control slipping with every passing minute. By the time the final toast was made, it was clear the night would be remembered for one thing, and it wasn't Elena's coronation. It was the unexpected return of a woman everyone had underestimated, and the partnership she had formed with the one man in the room Daniel couldn't compete with. As guests began to leave, Amelia stood near the exit with Victor, thanking people for attending. When Daniel and Elena approached, she met their eyes with that same calm certainty she'd worn all night. "Congratulations," she said to Elena, her tone polite but cool. "It's a beautiful crown." Elena forced a smile. "Thank you." Then Amelia's gaze shifted to Daniel. "I'll see you around," she said, and there was no threat in her voice, just inevitability. Daniel nodded stiffly, but inside he knew this wasn't over. Not because he had unfinished business, but because Amelia had just begun hers. And that was the real twist. The gala wasn't her comeback. It was her opening move. 2 weeks after the gala, Amelia Hart was no longer the woman Daniel thought he could erase. The morning after that night, her name and photograph were everywhere, splashed across society pages, business columns, and charity newsletters. Headlines called her the surprise star of the Crown and Charity Gala, and the woman who outshone the Queen. Some framed it as a mystery. Who is Amelia Hart, and why did Victor Lang bring her? Others focused on her initiative, praising the Hart-Lang partnership as the most ambitious children's program the city had ever seen. Amelia didn't hide from the attention. She embraced it. But she was strategic. She declined gossip interviews, redirecting every conversation back to the Heartlang Initiative. She accepted invitations to speak at events, not for exposure, but to build credibility as a leader in philanthropy. She understood that her presence at the gala had been dramatic, but sustaining influence required more than one night. The transformation began in her personal life. She moved out of the house she had shared with Daniel, choosing a penthouse apartment in the heart of the city. It wasn't ostentatious, but it was modern, filled with light and, most importantly, hers. She furnished it with pieces she loved: an oversized reading chair, art from local painters, and a kitchen stocked with the tools she actually used. The nursery, painted in soft shades of gray and cream, overlooked the skyline. She wanted her child's first view of the world to be expansive. Physically, she took care of herself with a discipline that surprised even her. She began working with a prenatal fitness trainer recommended by Victor's wife, an elegant woman who had taken an immediate liking to Amelia. She booked regular appointments with a stylist who understood how to enhance her natural beauty without making her look like someone she wasn't. Her hair, once hastily tied back, now framed her face in soft waves. Her wardrobe shifted from practical but forgettable to refined: tailored dresses, silk blouses, and statement coats that turned heads without screaming for attention. But the real change was internal. The quiet, self-effacing woman who once deferred to Daniel's every decision was gone. In her place was someone who understood her own value, who could walk into a room of power brokers and hold her ground. She didn't just react anymore, she planned. She made lists, set goals, and refused to let fear dictate her choices. The humiliation she'd endured had become fuel. Victor noticed the difference immediately. In their weekly meetings about the initiative, she was sharper, more assertive. She challenged ideas, proposed partnerships, and navigated delicate negotiations with a finesse that made even seasoned board members take note. "You've always had it," Victor told her one afternoon as they left a strategy session. "You just needed to stop asking for permission to use it." The city noticed too. Within a month, she was invited to join the advisory board for another major children's charity. Her face appeared in a profile piece for a national magazine about women leading change. She was photographed attending a fundraiser alongside CEOs, elected officials, and artists, always poised, always in control. Daniel, meanwhile, was watching all of this unfold from the sidelines, and it was eating at him. He had expected the gala to be a one-time disruption, a dramatic but fleeting appearance. Instead, Amelia's influence was growing. Donors he'd been courting were now contributing to her initiative. Event invitations that once came to him and Elena now went to Amelia and Victor. Even Elena had begun to sense the shift, her public smile tightening every time Amelia's name came up in conversation. But Amelia wasn't playing a game to undermine them. She was building something that had nothing to do with them at all. Her focus was forward. She was preparing for the arrival of her child, finalizing the first year's projects for the initiative, and making sure her new life was one she could sustain without leaning on anyone who might take it away. The biggest step in her transformation came when she agreed to give a keynote speech at the city's annual Women in Leadership Summit. The theme was resilience and reinvention. She didn't name Daniel, didn't recount the personal betrayal in detail, but her words carried the weight of her experience. Sometimes, she told the packed auditorium, we are pushed out of spaces we thought we belonged in. It feels like a door slamming. But what I've learned is that sometimes that slam is an invitation to build a different door, one that leads exactly where you were meant to go. The standing ovation was immediate. Reporters quoted her for days afterward. Clips of her speech were shared online, accompanied by comments from women who saw their own stories reflected in hers. She had become, without trying, a symbol for taking back control after being discarded. Her private moments were quieter, but no less meaningful. She began each morning with a routine: tea, a few minutes of journaling, and a review of her plans for the day. In the evenings, she would sit by the nursery window, one hand resting on her belly, thinking about the kind of future she wanted to create, not just for her child, but for herself. Her confidence didn't mean she was immune to vulnerability. There were still nights when she lay awake, memories of her marriage flickering like an old film reel. But now, she didn't dwell there. She acknowledged the pain, then turned her focus back to the present. She reminded herself that the woman in those memories had survived, and the woman she was now was thriving. By the time winter's first snow dusted the city, Amelia was unrecognizable from the person who had once crumpled on the kitchen floor. Her calendar was full, her initiative was ahead of schedule, and her phone was constantly buzzing with new opportunities. More importantly, she felt steady, rooted in a sense of self-worth that no crown, no man, and no betrayal could take away. When she caught her reflection in the elevator mirror one evening, hair perfectly in place, eyes sharp, a subtle smile playing at her lips, she realized the transformation wasn't about appearance at all. It was about ownership. She had reclaimed her narrative, and she wasn't giving it back. Daniel might still be telling anyone who'd listen that Elena's crown was the pinnacle of their success, but Amelia knew better. Crowns tarnish. Influence fades. What lasts is the life you build when you stop asking to be included and start deciding where you belong. And Amelia Hart had decided. The annual City Leaders Forum wasn't a glamorous event like the Crown and Charity Gala, but it was arguably more important. It was where the real power players gathered, not just to be seen, but to make decisions that shaped the city's future. Politicians, CEOs, foundation heads, and media executives filled the grand conference hall, each with a vested interest in the proposals being presented. This year, the keynote panel was on innovating philanthropy, and 3 featured speakers were announced weeks in advance: Victor Lang, the chair of the City Development Council, and Daniel Cross. What Daniel didn't know, what no one outside a select few knew, was that a 4th speaker had been quietly added to the program just 3 days earlier. Her name appeared at the very end of the agenda: Amelia Hart, founder, Hart Lang Initiative. She hadn't planned to share a stage with him so soon. But when the forum organizers called, explaining that they wanted her perspective on building sustainable charitable models, she recognized the opportunity for what it was: the perfect public setting to dismantle the image Daniel had been crafting for years. Not with accusations, not with gossip, but with proof. The day of the event, Amelia arrived in a tailored dove-gray suit and pearl-drop earrings, her hair swept into a sleek knot. She looked every inch the executive she had become, serious, composed, and utterly unbothered. Victor met her in the lobby, his expression unreadable. "Ready?" he asked. "I've been ready since the gala," she replied. Inside the main hall, Daniel was already holding court near the stage, shaking hands with council members, smiling for photos. Elena was there too, in a fitted crimson dress, clearly enjoying the attention of the press, who still referred to her as last year's queen of the city. When Daniel spotted Amelia walking in with Victor, his smile faltered for a split second before snapping back into place. The morning sessions passed in a blur of presentations and discussions. Amelia remained quiet, listening, taking notes. She wasn't here to dominate the event. She was here to strike once, decisively. The panel began after lunch. Victor spoke first, outlining the importance of transparency and collaboration in philanthropy. Daniel followed, delivering a polished speech about his latest corporate-sponsored programs, complete with glossy slides and buzzwords. He ended with a not-so-subtle jab. "We've proven that with the right partnerships and the right people, you can make real change." His eyes flickered toward Amelia before he stepped back from the podium. The moderator smiled. "And now, we'll hear from Miss Amelia Hart." She rose, her heels clicking softly against the stage floor. She didn't bring slides. She didn't need them. "Thank you," she began, her voice steady. "We've talked today about partnerships and change, but change doesn't come from image. It comes from impact, and impact requires accountability." She paused, letting the room settle. "I want to share an example from a recent review my team conducted on city-funded charitable programs. We found that some projects looked impressive on paper, but delivered very little to the communities they were meant to serve. Why? Because the focus was on branding, not outcomes. Dollars went into photo ops instead of measurable results. The shift in the room was immediate. People leaned forward. Pens hovered over notepads. "Transparency," she continued, "means showing not just where the money comes from, but where it goes. I believe that every donor, every sponsor, and every beneficiary deserves to see the results." Real results, not staged moments. She reached into the slim folder she carried and pulled out a single-page chart. Here's one example. Program X, launched last year with significant corporate backing, claimed to provide 500 scholarship opportunities. Public reports celebrated the launch, but our review found that fewer than 50 students ever received support, and most of those grants were partial. The rest of the funds were absorbed by administrative costs, event expenses, and marketing. There was a murmur across the audience. The program's name wasn't on the chart, but those who knew the industry recognized the details. They also knew whose company had sponsored it, Daniel's. Amelia didn't look at him. She didn't have to. Now, she said, this isn't about pointing fingers, it's about raising standards. The Heartlang Initiative operates on a strict 85-15 model. 85% of every dollar goes directly to services and recipients. We publish quarterly reports for our donors and invite independent auditors to verify our outcomes, because if you're serious about change, you welcome scrutiny. Her final words landed with the weight of a gavel. We can't afford to confuse appearances with progress. Children don't need crowns, they need results. The applause began slowly, then built into something sustained and undeniable. Even members of the press, seated in the back, were clapping. The moderator thanked her, but the buzz in the room didn't die down. When the panel ended, reporters swarmed her, asking for copies of her report, requesting interviews. Victor fielded some of the questions, but most were directed at Amelia. Daniel stood off to the side, his jaw tight, as conversation swirled around her instead of him. Elena, sensing the tension, touched his arm. It wasn't personal, she murmured, though they both knew it was exactly that. Amelia left the stage without looking back. She knew what she'd done. She hadn't accused Daniel of anything directly. She'd simply put facts in front of the right audience and let them draw their own conclusions. And in the circles that mattered, perception was reality. By the time she reached the exit, her phone was already buzzing with messages from donors wanting to meet, organizations wanting to collaborate, and media outlets requesting her comment. She stepped into the crisp afternoon air, inhaling deeply. Victor joined her on the sidewalk. Well, he said with a faint smile, you didn't just open the door, you took the whole wall down. Amelia allowed herself a small laugh. He built it on sand. I just let the tide in. And in that moment she knew the public payback was complete. Not because Daniel had been embarrassed, though he had, but because she had shifted the conversation. She had taken the space he tried to claim for himself and filled it with something better, something lasting. For the first time, the narrative was entirely hers. Winter sunlight spilled across the polished marble floor of Amelia Hart's penthouse, catching in the steam that curled up from her mug of tea. The city stretched beyond the window, cold, brilliant, alive. Inside, the apartment was warm, peaceful, and filled with the quiet hum of a life rebuilt. Her baby slept in the bassinet near the window, swaddled in a soft gray blanket. Amelia's gaze softened as she watched the gentle rise and fall of his chest. He was only a few weeks old, but already she could see the strength in him, the same quiet resilience that had carried her through the storm. The weeks since the City Leaders Forum had been a whirlwind. Her speech had gone viral in business and nonprofit circles, praised as a wake-up call for the philanthropic community. Invitations poured in. Conferences, panels, collaborations. The Heartlang Initiative had more funding than it could spend in the next 2 years. And through it all, Amelia had kept her focus exactly where she wanted it, on building something that mattered. Daniel hadn't spoken to her since the forum. She'd heard from mutual acquaintances that the corporate-backed program she'd exposed was under review, and that a few sponsors had pulled out of his future projects. Elena had been spotted alone at several events, the crown she'd won now feeling more like a relic than a victory. Amelia didn't celebrate their trouble, not outwardly, but she didn't mourn it either. Actions had consequences. She was sitting at her desk, reviewing the final approval documents for a new mentorship program, when her phone buzzed with a call from an unfamiliar number. She considered ignoring it, but answered on the third ring. Miss Hart? The voice was deep, deliberate. This is Councilman Rivera. I wanted to personally thank you for your remarks at the forum. You've shifted the conversation in ways that will change how we allocate city funding. I was hoping you might consider joining our advisory council." Amelia smiled faintly. "I'd be honored," she said, and meant it. After the call, she leaned back in her chair, letting the weight of the moment settle over her. Months ago, she'd been sitting on her kitchen floor, too broken to eat. Now she was shaping policy. The arc of that journey wasn't lost on her. That afternoon, she took the baby for a walk in the park. The sky was pale blue, the kind of crisp winter day that made the air taste clean. Strangers smiled at her as she passed, some recognizing her from the gala or the forum, others simply responding to the sight of a mother and child. She greeted each one, but her thoughts were turned inward. At a bench near the fountain, she sat and unwrapped the baby just enough to touch his tiny hand. "You're going to grow up knowing your worth," she whispered. "No one will ever make you feel small. Not if I can help it." As she sat there, a familiar figure appeared at the edge of her vision. Daniel. He looked older than she remembered, thinner, the confidence in his posture replaced by something more guarded. He approached slowly, his hands buried in his coat pockets. "I heard about the baby," he said, stopping a few feet away. Amelia nodded. "He's doing well." Daniel's gaze flicked to the child, then back to her. I wanted to say congratulations, and I'm sorry for everything." The words hung in the cold air between them. Once she might have clung to them, dissected them, tried to find sincerity in their edges. Now she simply accepted them for what they were, a late admission, more for his conscience than for her healing. "Thank you," she said evenly. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Daniel." He nodded, his jaw tight, and walked away without another word. Amelia watched him go, not with anger, not with longing, but with the kind of detachment that comes when something has truly ended. As the sun began to dip, she wrapped her son again and headed home. The city lights flickered on one by one, glowing against the darkening sky. By the time she reached her building, her phone was buzzing again. Another meeting request, another opportunity. She smiled as she silenced it, deciding it could wait until tomorrow. That evening, she sat by the nursery window, her son sleeping soundly beside her. She picked up her journal and began to write. Not about Daniel, not about the pain, but about the future. Lesson 1. Never let anyone decide your worth. Lesson 2. The crown is nothing without the work behind it. Lesson 3. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be diminished. When she finished, she closed the journal and looked out over the city. Somewhere out there, people were still talking about the gala, the forum, the rivalry that had fueled countless headlines. But Amelia knew the truth. The real story wasn't about a crown, or a man, or even a single night's triumph. It was about the quiet, relentless decision to rise, again and again, until the life you deserve is the life you're living. The baby stirred, and she reached over, resting a gentle hand on his chest. "We're going to be just fine," she whispered. "Better than fine." In the weeks that followed, her influence only grew. She launched the mentorship program, expanded the scholarship initiative, and opened talks for a children's wellness center. She hired a team, mentored young women in business, and spoke at universities about resilience. Her story traveled farther than she could have imagined, not as a tale of scandal, but as proof that being underestimated could be the best advantage. One night, months later, she attended another gala, this time as the guest of honor. The room rose when she entered, not because of a crown or a title, but because she had earned their respect. Victor introduced her with a simple truth. Some people wait to be invited to the table. Others build their own. Amelia stepped to the microphone, her voice steady. "I've been called a lot of things these past few months," she said with a smile. "But the one I hold on to is survivor. Not because I endured, but because I chose to live better. And that's my challenge to every woman in this room. You are not what was done to you. You are what you decide to do next." The applause was thunderous, the kind that vibrated in your chest. Cameras flashed, but Amelia barely noticed. Her focus was on the faces in the crowd, some smiling, some teary-eyed, all of them listening. When she stepped away from the podium, she felt no need to look back. The chapter was closed. The crown, the betrayal, the public payback, they were part of her story, but not the definition of it. Amelia Hart had moved on, and in doing so, she had won in the only way that mattered. So the story has ended. My wonderful friends, are you still here with me until now? If you are, it means something in Amelia's journey has quietly touched your heart. Remember this heterodox truth. Scars are proof that the broken can still be beautiful. No matter what life takes from you, you can still rise and shine. If you feel that in your soul, please like, share, and subscribe, and leave a comment so I know you're walking this path with me.